George Jowett could grab a 168-pound anvil by the horn, lift it to his shoulder, and press it overhead with one hand. He never touched a barbell to build that grip. He built it swinging a hammer over an anvil 12 hours a day for years. Modern lifters spent a decade doing wrist curls and forearm rollers and still can't crush a handshake the way a working blacksmith could without trying. Here's the uncomfortable part. The science backs this up. Manual laborers test out over 12% stronger in grip than office workers. No gym required. So what did a trade profession figure out about grip strength that a gym full of equipment still hasn't replicated? It wasn't the size of the muscle. It was 3 specific things their hands were doing every single day that almost nobody trains on purpose anymore. By the end of this video, you'll know exactly what those 3 things are and exactly how to rebuild them with tools you already have. Before blacksmithing was a hobby, it was survival. A working smith spent his entire day doing 2 things at once, holding a piece of red-hot iron rock steady with a pair of tongs in one hand, while driving a hammer into it with the other, over and over, for hours. There was no rest between reps. There was no isolating one muscle. Every strike demanded the whole forearm, wrist, and hand working together, and every second in between demanded an iron grip just to keep the metal from slipping out of the tongs. George Jowett grew up in exactly that world. He was a blacksmith and chainmaker by trade before he became one of the most famous strongmen of his era. Years of that work gave him 8 1/4-inch wrists, 15 1/4-inch forearms, and hands strong enough that lifting an anvil by its narrow horn and pressing it overhead wasn't a trick, it was Tuesday. He got so well known for it that he eventually wrote a training manual called Molding a Mighty Grip, trying to teach other people what his trade had beaten into him for free. He wasn't the only one. Jowett Aston held the title of Britain's strongest man from 1911 to 1934, and even he, a man who trained strength for a living, singled out grip as something you had to chase specifically. His favorite method wasn't a machine. It was hanging by one arm from a climbing rope, timed until his hand gave out. No manual on earth teaches a beginner lifter to think this way. But 100 years ago, the people who worked with their hands for a living already knew it instinctively. Your grip doesn't get strong from an exercise. It gets strong from a job that refuses to let go of you first. Here's where it stops being folklore and starts being measurable. Researchers testing hand grip strength across occupations found that light manual workers average close to 53 kilograms of grip force, compared to roughly 47 kilograms for office employees, better than a 12% gap, without either group doing a single dedicated grip workout. The manual workers weren't training grip. Their jobs were training grip, as a side effect of just doing the work. The same research found something modern training almost never accounts for. Grip strength correlates directly with forearm circumference, not bicep size, not general being fit, specifically the girth of the forearm itself. The tighter that correlation, the more it suggests your forearm isn't growing because you decided to train it. It's growing because your hands are under load, for long stretches, in awkward positions, over and over. This is exactly the gap in most modern programs. A typical lifter does 3 sets of wrist curls at the end of a session, isolated, seated, wrists moving through a clean. Comfortable range of motion with a machine or a bar doing most of the stabilizing. A smith's hands never got that luxury. They were gripping an irregular tool handle, off-center, under vibration for the entire time a piece of iron stayed hot enough to work. There's actually a documented gap in the research here too. Nobody has properly studied how forearm size responds to training volume the way it's been studied for the chest or the quads. The forearm has been treated as an afterthought in exercise science for decades, the same way it's treated as an afterthought in most people's programming. The trade never had that luxury. The forearm was the tool. If it failed, the work stopped. Break down what a smith's hands were actually doing, and you get 3 distinct mechanical demands that modern training treats as 3 separate optional accessories instead of one connected system. First, striking. Every hammer blow isn't just an arm swinging down. It's your wrist and forearm controlling rotation on the way down and absorbing shock on the way back up, pronation, supination. And a constant fight against the tool trying to twist out of your hand on impact. This is precisely what a sledgehammer recreates today. Swinging one against a tire trains your forearm through pronation, supination, and both ulnar and radial deviation in a single motion the same rotational control a smith needed every time metal met anvil. You can make it harder or easier just by choking up or sliding your grip down toward the end of the handle, changing the leverage your hand has to fight against. Second, sustained isometric holding. Tongs don't grip themselves. For every second a smith's hammer arm was moving, his other hand was locked in a static, unrelenting grip, holding hot iron dead still against the anvil. That's not a rep-based exercise. That's time under tension in its purest form, and it's exactly what Jowett Aston was training when he hung from a rope one arm at a time, timed until his fingers opened against his will. A dead hang does the same thing today, no machine required, just a bar and gravity refusing to be polite about it. Third, irregular load handling. Smithing tools weren't ergonomic. Handles were rough, worn, uneven, thick in places a modern dumbbell never is. Gripping something irregular recruits far more of the hand and forearm than gripping a smooth, machined bar, because your hand has to actively fight to keep the tool from rotating in your palm. That's the entire logic behind thick-handled grip tools today. They're not a gimmick. They're a direct recreation of what a trade tool actually felt like in a working hand. Put those three together: rotational striking, sustained isometric holding, irregular load handling, and you get the actual mechanism behind why a blacksmith's forearms outgrew a modern lifter's without either group calling it Forearm Day. You don't need a forge to rebuild this. You need to recreate the three demands in order and let your hands do what a trade already proved they're capable of. Start with the striking pattern. Get an 8-pound sledgehammer and a truck tire, or any heavy surface you're allowed to hit. Two-handed overhead strikes alternating sides for sets of 10 to 15 swings. Choke up near the head of the hammer when you're learning the movement, more control, less punishment on the wrists. Once that feels manageable, slide your grip down toward the end of the handle. The extra leverage will humble you immediately, and that's the point. 3 to 4 sets, 2 to 3 times a week, is enough to feel the shift. Next, the isometric hold. Find a pull-up bar or anything overhead you can hang your full body weight from. Dead hang both hands, and just stay there until your grip opens on its own, not until it's uncomfortable, until it actually fails. Time it. Write the number down. That number is now the standard you're trying to beat next session. The same way Aston tracked his own hang times a century ago. Once bodyweight hangs get easy, move to one arm at a time. Exactly like he trained it, even a few seconds on one arm will humble most lifters who've never tried it. Finally, the irregular load. If you don't own thick-handled grip tools, wrap a towel around a dumbbell handle or barbell and grip through the towel instead of the bar directly. It recreates the same fight against rotation a rough tool handle demanded. Farmer carries done this way. Gripping through a towel instead of a smooth handle, turn an ordinary carry into a genuine grip event. Walk for distance or time, put the weight down before your grip fails completely, and build back up from there. 3 tools. No forge, no anvil, no 12-hour trade apprenticeship. Just the same 3 mechanical demands a working blacksmith's hands never got to escape. Rebuilt on your own schedule. A blacksmith never did a single dedicated grip workout in his life. He didn't need to. The work demanded it every single day, and his hands had no choice but to answer. That's the whole lesson buried in a 168-pound anvil pressed overhead by a man who spent his life at a forge, not a gym. Strength built by necessity doesn't disappear just because the trade did. The mechanics are still sitting there, waiting for anyone willing to pick up a hammer, a bar, and a towel. Try the 3 moves this week: sledgehammer strikes, dead hangs, towel grip carries, and tell me in the comments how your grip holds up by the end of it. If this is the kind of forgotten system you want more of, subscribe, because the next one's already in the works.